Hello there, hockey fans, and welcome to another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's Stix.com. I'm George Nassios, joined as always by my co host, Andrew McInnis, riding high after a 6-3 Habs victory over the Senators, kind of more solidifying that last wildcard spot. And we're going to talk about their opponent, the Ottawa Senators, the opponent they just defeated. The Sens had won 6 in a row going into that big matchup against the Montreal. So they've won 6 of 7 still. Their odds to win a playoff series, not to make the playoffs. Now we're talking about their odds to win a playoff series. The Senators have gone to plus 215. Considering their current hot streak and their acquisitions at the deadline, is this a team you'd be buying on to actually win a playoff series?
One thing about this Senators team, if we look at it conceptually, they've really still relied upon Linus Ullmark quite a bit. And so it's been exciting for the Ottawa Senators. It's been great for hockey in Canada overall to see so many Canadian teams doing well. I think as of this point, like, what is it? One Canadian team that isn't really in it. I mean, it's exciting. But at the end of the day, they picked up Linus Ullmark in the offseason when Boston realized they had to pick between Swayman and Ullmark. Obviously, they made their choice. But when you look at some of the games that they've won during the streak that they had before the Habs knocked them down on Tuesday night,
Little cushion on that score. It was 6-3, but it was 4-3 with a couple empty netters. So.
That's true. That is true. But they've still given up 3 goals in a lot of those games. And so when I was kind of going through some stuff, has their defense improved a lot, George? That's one thing I worry about. Has their defense improved? Or did they just go out and get a good goaltender? Because they can't afford any mistakes on their back end. And that's the thing I worry about them in the playoffs. This team, people say they're built for the playoffs. You know, they've got a guy like Tkachuk. We saw what he was able to do at the Four Nations. He is starving for playoff hockey. I think Batherson will be a good playoff player. And I have to admit, as much as a Canadians fan, I'll make fun of Timmy Stützle for flopping sometimes. That guy has turned into a 200-foot player. But, you know, if they play a team like the Florida Panthers or even the Washington Capitals, those teams are kind of like the big brother versions of how Ottawa plays. So for that reason, I think I'm out on them to kind of pull kind of that shocker in the first round. Then again, we all know what a hot goaltender can do for a team. But I'm worried about how they're winning games right now, George. Are you with me on that? I mean, it's not like they're shutting team. We can't really necessarily say the Ottawa Senators have been playing playoff hockey when they're winning 5-3, 4-3. You can't give up that many goals in the playoffs like they are right now.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I will say since the acquisition of Cousins and actually in March overall, if you look at the analytics, they've been sensational. They've been sensational, dominating, expected. It wasn't just like, I think they're fluking these wins. Maybe the defense hasn't been as good, but if you look at expected goals for, they're well ahead of their opponents in each of those games. And I don't think they can. I don't think they can take an injury to their defenseman. And although I will say Washington definitely looks like they won the trade for Chychrun for Nick Jensen. Jensen wasn't playing in the Montreal game, and I think for a team like Ottawa, any one of those top 4 defensemen being out of their lineup significantly hurts them more than it would hurt other teams. So at plus 215, I just don't think the juice is really worth the squeeze there. Yes, Washington's locked into that top seed in the East, but it could still be Florida's got the lead right now, but it could still be Tampa or Toronto, realistically, that takes that number 1 seed in the Atlantic division that Ottawa could be facing. I just think at plus 215, I need a little bit more. I need a plus 300 mark for me to roll the dice on Ottawa right now. But I think they've been playing great. Maybe defensively, they can shore things up a bit, but they're playing great offensively, and I feel like they're dominating for when it comes to Corsi expected goals for, and that showed in the wins lately. So I just think I need a bit better odds for a team that just hasn't been in the playoffs for so long. It might be just a little happy to get there. So we'll see how it plays out, but it's amazing in a span of a few weeks. We were talking about the odds for them to make the playoffs, and now talking about the odds for them to actually win a playoff series. I'm sure you're hoping for the same thing for your Montreal Canadiens a week or two from now, but we'll see how that story plays out. From one of the teams in a wild card spot, we're going to move to one of the teams that's perhaps a Stanley Cup favorite from the East. We're talking about the Carolina Hurricanes here. They're plus 440, win the Eastern Conference Final. behind only the Panthers, who are the favorites at plus 195. This is without Rantanen, without Nassios. Would you still take Carolina at this price to come out of the East? Plus 440 to come out of the East.
You know, it's kind of funny because you look at it right now, and not only do they not have, you know, Rantanen, you know, losing Nassios, like you mentioned, it's like this team taking a step backwards. It's not like they've really taken a step forwards. It's kind of like one of those things where you look at it and you have a team that is kind of taking one last kick at the can. You know, I guess the one new addition we can talk about is Taylor Hall on that left wing next to Cook and Niemi, but sometimes the best trade is no trade. And we've seen how this Carolina Hurricanes team has looked since they got rid of Rantanen. I don't know, George, sometimes what to believe with these quotes. I'm curious your thoughts here. Rantanen said, no, I gave it a try there. I don't know if this guy gave it a try. It sounded like the second that he was there, he was figuring out which teams he wanted to leave for. But at the end of the day, it just seems like this team, the cohesion, the chemistry, they're playing the way that they want to play. And, you know, some teams, some players can't really match up with that dump and chase style of hockey. But right now, this roster looks deep. And I think when you look at some of the teams in the Eastern Conference, Florida Panthers, whether it's off-season or it's deadline acquisitions, they've got some new players. Tampa Bay, new players. You know, Toronto, they're still trying to figure things out. There's some teams that are trying to figure things out. Right now, Carolina hit that refresh button, and they're just running it back with their main core. You know, this to me is a price that I'm a little bit interested in. And the only reason why I say that is because you look at the price for the team to win it, the top price with Florida. I think it's kind of intriguing here with Carolina. You know, it's always funny when you try and zig when somebody else is zagging. And pretty much if you bet on Carolina since the Rantanen trade, you're feeling pretty good about yourself. So it's very interesting to look at. And I think that there is value right now on Carolina. Do you think that there's probably the most pressure on this team out of a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference based on how they've been buzzing around for the past few years?
It's a good question. I actually think the pressure is less now because all the talk surrounding this team has been about how they royally screwed up with the Rantanen situation. And their GM Eric Taluski actually addressed it the other day, or it might have actually been today, saying that they knew going into making the trade that he didn't want to sign an extension there, but they figured once they brought him in on board that he might reconsider, and he didn't reconsider, and that's what the GM said, speaking for Rantanen, and they had to ship him out. They are red hot right now, but the difference between having what's Rantanen, 6'4", 220 forward in the lineup, and putting Logan Stankoven in there, who's undersized, I think still a good player. I think that shows up more in the playoffs. They always seem to fall short. And if Rantanen was in their lineup, I would say he's their best playoff player. I love Sebastian Aho, but they don't have that top tier guy that a Florida, Toronto, Tampa has. And they also, I'm not convinced on their goaltending either. I think they have a great defense core, but I'm not sold on their goaltending either. I don't even know who their number one goaltender is going to be in the playoffs. And it seems year after year they rotate their goalies due to injury or whatever. So the lack of
have your guy.
Lack of top tier talent, the lack of a true number one goaltender. The odds are good. They're juicy and they are red hot right now. I just don't see it happening for them. The only team I can think of in recent memory that won a Stanley Cup, and I know we're talking about just getting to the Stanley Cup here, but the only team I can think of in recent memory without that top end talent or kind of an unproven goaltender was the St. Louis Blues a few years ago, who rode a rookie Jordan Binnington, who had a sensational playoffs all the way to a Stanley Cup championship without a true, like, really stud player. I mean, Alex Pietrangelo is basically their best player, I'd say. So the odds are pretty good at plus 440 for a very good team, but I just don't see it happening for Carolina. I don't know what you think about what I'm saying there, but
no, I get it. I mean, the thing is right now you want to have depth and you want to have that kind of consistency throughout your lineup. But when it comes down to it, you need game breakers. That's what you need. You need game breakers. You need guys that are going to be able to who was that player? I'm trying to remember. There was a player that they called Mr. Game 7.
Oh, Justin Williams.
Yes, exactly. Right. I mean,
He won a Conn Smythe Trophy with the LA Kings, one of the more players that you would forget about, obviously, that's won a Conn Smythe Trophy.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing. And you need players like that. So when you look at a team like that overall, you can talk about consistency. You can talk about depth on a roster, but you do need those game breakers. It's a really good point. But it comes to a point where I was listening to a conversation actually earlier today talking about coach of the year nods and talking about different players that have coached. And of course, the podcast I was listening to was a Canadians podcast talking about St. Louis and how he's turned it around as a coach. And they asked the guests about Rod Brind'Amour. And I don't want to spend too much time on this team, but I'm curious, he's a great coach. He preaches his system. It seems like a little bit, George, this year, they've kind of tweaked their system, recognizing the NHL has turned into more of an offensive league. You can't shut down every time. But is there pressure on Rod the Bod here? Is there pressure on this guy to kind of tweak things himself? Or, like you said, does he get a pass for what the GM did for his mistakes? Because right now, this guy, he's in the mix every year. He's in the mix all the time, but can't get the job done in the big series.
Yeah, I think he gets a pass just because of the situation there this year and the fact I'm pretty sure they went through some contract stuff at the end of playoffs last year and he's locked up for a while now. I mean, I think everybody respects Rod Brind'Amour as a coach, and I think he's going to be there for a while. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Hurricanes. But we're going to shift focus to a much more disappointing team this year, especially after a good start. The New York Rangers, less than 20 games left in the season. They're firmly in the wild card race, but they're sitting on the outside looking in behind Ottawa and Montreal. Their odds are at plus 124 to make the postseason. Is this Rangers team too talented to not take a shot at this bet?
Well, look, when Gallant got fired a couple years ago for the Rangers, he pretty much said, work ethic is just as important as talent. And hard work will beat talent 7 days a week. Pretty much called out his superstars saying, look at the paper, look at the sheet, look at the names on this roster. I'll be the first person to tell you, and I've made it very clear on the cheat sheet. I'm a Canadians fan. The Rangers roster, name by name, line for line. Are you kidding me? That's more talent on that team. But they don't play the right way. That's the problem with this team is that they play. If this was a summer league 4-on-4 non-contact, sign me up for a Rangers to win that whole tournament. You trade away Jacob Trouba, who has those bone-crunching hits. Sure, he wasn't living up to his contract. They sure made some nice moves. They pick up JT Miller. This team just doesn't seem to get the job done when the time is right. And I've been talking about it on the show for the past probably 4 or 5 weeks now, that the odds makers had the Rangers and Senators, no matter really what was going on between losses, wins for all these 4 or 5 teams, Columbus, Detroit, Montreal, whoever, it was always Rangers and Senators for the odds makers. They hadn't changed it. Then all of a sudden the Senators, you wake up and they're minus 3,000 to make the playoffs. So they're locked in, right? And this Rangers team, the question is what's going to change from what we're seeing right now for this team moving forward? And the way I look at it is their strength of schedule is about middle of the pack. Is there value? Sure. But I'll tell you what, Columbus plays hockey the right way, even though they don't have the skill. Montreal is playing the right way. They don't have the skill. And I'll throw it back to you with this. Do you think that the New York Rangers have a clear-cut bottom 6? Because I always think it's a problem when your bottom 6 guys want to be top 6 guys. The Montreal Canadiens, Brendan Gallagher knows he's not a top 6 player. He goes out there and does what he's doing. Christian Dvorak, he's not a goal scorer. He's a penalty killer. They don't go out there and try and score. And I feel like for the Rangers, they've got too many guys that want to be the man.
Yeah, I mean, you make some good points there. I think they brought along some good young players, and Will Cooley's had a good year, big, strong forward. They've gotten rid of some of those bottom 6 guys as well, or guys that you think would have been bottom 6 guys in Capo Caco and Filipino, who along with Alexis Lafreniere were great young kids line in the playoffs past. Look, this team's made, as much as they've underachieved, they made the conference final 2 of the last 3 years. So I think you're probably in agreement with me that Ottawa's got one of the wild card spots. So now we're picking one other one from Montreal, who's got the spot right now, the Rangers, Columbus, and Detroit. Me, I love the Columbus story. I just think the fact they've fallen out of it, I just don't think they got the horses to get it over the line. I think Montreal has been a bit overachieving and they're on a hot run right now and they got the spot, so they're in pole position. And to me, honestly, it comes down to Detroit and the Rangers. Detroit just missed out on that spot last year. I'm going to take the Rangers at plus money. I think there's too much talent, and they got a sensational goaltender who can steal some games down the stretch here. 2 conference finals in the last 3 years. Huge expectations for this season, and they're not going to make the playoffs. I'm going to say at plus 124, I bet on them to get over the finish line. So are you picking them to make the playoffs? I'm just going to ask you the quick question. Is it yes or no right now? Or would you take one of the other teams? And if you are, which one? Are you going to take the Habs?
At the current odds, no, I don't think so. Last week, I said the Habs. I said, hey, call me a fan all you want. And they were like plus 450. And the odds still haven't really moved that much for the Rangers. It's just almost equal Habs and Rangers. And at this point, I'm still not buying it. So I will say no. And do I think the Habs can make it? Well, it's going to be tough to maintain how they're playing. Think about it like this. Columbus hasn't looked very good recently, have they? And they're still right there.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, right? Because Columbus, they kind of went through their losing streak and they're still like a point or two back. It's not like they're going to lose the rest of the games all year. So I don't know. I'm just not really a believer in this Rangers team at that price.
Okay. I will take the Rangers at that price. It'll be an amazing stretch run for these teams trying to get that final wild card spot in the East. Now we're going to move over to the Devils, who have been hit with some huge injuries. Dougie Hamilton, once again out. It seems like he always seems to suffer injuries. When he's playing, he's a dynamic, huge offensive defenseman who can lay the body as well. And obviously Jack Hughes, not coming back for the regular season or the playoffs. Devils are minus 164 to be eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. Does this team have a shot at making any noise in the playoffs without Hughes and maybe without Hamilton as well?
It's going to be real tough. It's going to be real tough. I think this is going to be, this was a popular team going into this year. A lot of people had them, as a team to make a real deep run, to make that final, push, not only to, win a couple rounds, but to potentially, go to the Stanley Cup final. And it really goes to show, George, regular seasons are great. Winning the regular season or having a great regular season, it's about preparing yourself for that postseason push. And I think what we've really seen, and I know I'm pointing out the obvious here, we've seen a little bit of kind of how top heavy this team was. Like if you're someone that's looking at fantasy or you're looking at player prop betting, Jack Hughes every night. If you like the Devils to win tonight, Jack Hughes is probably going to do something. If you like the Devils to have a good game, Jack Hughes is going to do something. Yeah. A lot of the great teams in the league, you shouldn't be able to say that for. You shouldn't be able to say it for. And right now, as it sits, they're playing Carolina. We talked about Carolina already. I think that this Carolina team, the big challenge for them has been able to get over that hump. And the hump for them hasn't been the first round. It's been second or third a lot of the time. So I think that they're going to struggle in that first round. I just think their depth is going to be really tough on them. But one thing I'll say, and I said it about Ottawa, the goaltending, man, former Canadians goaltender here, kind of close to my neck of the woods where I'm recording right now, Jake Allen. I mean, this guy, him and then his counterpart as well, both those guys playing pretty well. A hot goaltender can go a long way for you in the playoffs, but I'm not a believer in the Devils.
Yeah, I like the fact that our producer Eric pointed out this bet, because I would smash the Devils to lose in the first round. They're on a crash course with Carolina. Unless something goes crazy in the last 15 games of the season, that's going to be your first round matchup. And I really don't think they stand a chance against the Canes. I think the Canes have a huge edge in coaching too, with Rod Brindamore compared to Sheldon Keefe. And I don't think I don't think New Jersey can get over these injuries. Minus 164, I would smash the Devils to lose in the first round. So I think that's a great bet for our viewers to make. We're going to shift our focus out west here. The LA Kings been on fire, winning 5 of their last 6 games, with 2 games in hand and only 5 points separating them from the Golden Knights for the Pacific Division lead. Their odds to win the division are at plus 350. Is this a bet worth taking?
I got to tell you, this LA Kings team has impressed me, and the biggest thing they've impressed me about is that they've had the ability to win both low scoring and high scoring games. And for a long time, this LA Kings team, they were pretty much kind of like the old-fashioned New York Islanders and kind of even the Hurricanes as well. If their opponent scored more than 2 goals, they were screwed. They were done. And we've seen them win 5-4 games, 6-5 games. We've seen this team go goal for goal with certain teams, not to mention the great goaltending they've had. And I think that they've had a lot more contributions from kind of secondary pieces a little bit. And people kind of it's funny because in other sports they give people more time to settle in. I find that in hockey, George, over every other sport, it's like this 20-year-old kid, they're not living up to expectations. You know who's playing really well right now is Quinton Byfield, and it takes a lot of pressure off some other players.
Yeah,
I
he
think
had a
right
slow
now this
start to this season for sure, but he's picked it
yeah,
up huge lately. I
it,
agree with you.
it's you talk a lot about the prices that you like, and I like talking like that too. I feel like this is intriguing enough. Is it plus enough for you to be interested, or is it not quite there?
I'm not going to take it. It is intriguing at the number. I just think Vegas just went through a tough run, road trip. They lost 4 or 5. They're very rested now. I believe their next game is on Thursday. I think they'll get back to it. Even their coach, Bruce Cassidy, with an in-game interview on the bench, I believe it was against Detroit, said, my players are just tired. They have no legs right now. They were playing on a back-to-back. They'll get it back together. Look, Edmonton's right in that mix too. Those teams are really close together. The odds are good. Plus 350. If you're considering, I'd say do it. I would not make the bet. I will say this. I think it's going to be Edmonton and LA in the first round, and we don't know who's going to get home ice advantage. LA has lost 3 years in a row to Edmonton in the playoffs. I see whether they're second and Edmonton's third, or Edmonton's second and their third. We know LA is going to be the underdogs. I can see an upset there. I can see LA beating Edmonton in the first round of playoffs, but I'm sticking with Vegas to win the division. So we'll see how the rest of the regular season plays out. I think Vegas, much like the Leafs in the East, went through a little tough stretch, and I think they're going to get it together here very soon. We're going to talk to about one of the worst teams in the league here, the Chicago Blackhawks. Hey, finally a bright spot for the Chicago Blackhawks, getting Spencer Knight at the deadline. Since joining the team, he's only played 4 games, but he's got a 2.22 goals against and a 928 save percentage. For fantasy players in keeper leagues, could Knight be a strong addition for those looking to make a long-term bet on a young goaltender?
100%. It starts with goaltending. And I can see right now with they pick up Leshinov, or they didn't pick him up, but they brought him up to their team now. Of course, they traded for Spencer Knight. They just seem to kind of be embracing the youth a little bit more, it seems like. And that's part of rebuilding, right? I mean, when I talk about a rebuild, when I talk about teams that are struggling, if you're going to be bad, don't be bad and old. Be bad and young. I feel like that's kind of the way. You need to have leaders around your guys. You need to have the veterans in the locker room. You can ask questions or stick up for you on the ice, but you need to be, well, let's face it. If you're going to be a lottery team, be a lottery team and young. That's why San Jose has been a lot more fun team to watch than Chicago, because I mean, wouldn't Bedard love to have his version of a Will Smith like Celebrini has? Who is that version for Bedard? Nobody. But now at least he can look behind him and say, man, that goaltender is going to be behind me for a long time in a Chicago Blackhawks uniform. I can feel confident about it. And we're going to be looking at fantasy stuff and saying Spencer Knight is somebody we all wish we had. So you talk about keeper leagues. I think that's kind of a long-term investment plan at this point, but I think it's certainly worth it. If you're in a league with a bunch of buddies you're going to be playing with for many, many years to come, I say you be that guy and scoop him up, because they're going to be good for many years.
Yeah, very good points for sure. Now we're going to talk about some young defensemen. Who would you rather have here in your keeper fantasy league? Brandt Clarke of the LA Kings or Lane Hutson? And just to point out, since Drew Doughty's come back, Clarke has lost a lot of PP1 time this year, which has impacted his production slightly.
I feel like anytime I'm asked a Montreal Canadiens question, I'm just here so I don't get fined. I feel like Marshawn Lynch. I don't really know what to look. Here's the deal. I said about the LA Kings that I've been more impressed this year about how they've had the ability to win high scoring games as well. right? That's been a problem for many years, how they were just winning low-scoring games. Obviously, low-scoring games means defensemen are just defensemen. Defensemen are jumping into the rush, and the less goals you score, obviously, the fewer opportunities for defensemen to gather points. Here's the deal, though. For the first part of the season, Lane Hutson wasn't even on the PP1, right? It was out of respect for Mike Matheson. And it was a battle between media, fans, and then ownership and GM saying, and coaches saying, hey, look, this is our veteran guy. We have to have him out here. And anybody that still likes to hate on Lane Hutson goes after him about his defensive abilities. Sure, there's been some blunders, but he's still, dealing with like these big players at his size.
Gotta be expected of any rookie defenseman, no matter what. We know he's undersized, but no matter what size, you can't expect a guy to come into the NHL and be great defensively. Like,
and that's the thing.
Makar is a once in a generation player.
This might be kind of wild, and maybe you can tell me right to my face if this is a crazy comparison, but I look at Brandt Clarke a little more like kind of like Caden Gooley or somebody like that on the Canadians. That's more of like a reliable defensive defenseman. Like Lane Hutson isn't out there taking defensive zone draws or out there in the defensive side of the ice. He's out there in offensive situations. I'm not saying the team doesn't rely on him to play defense, which is his natural position, but they trust him offensively. I think Clarke is more of a natural, up and down defenseman versus how Lane Hutson's going to be used as just an offensive guy. So I would say Hutson. I always try and keep my bias out of things here, George, but I just naturally believe Clark's going to be used in a lot more actual defensive situations. He's going to have more of a shutdown role. If things go well for Brandt Clarke and the LA Kings, he's shutting down key players on top teams. I think Lane Hutson, he's not part of that future plan for the Canadians to be going up against top pairs. Is that true?
No, I'd absolutely agree with you. I'd also say Montreal is a team on the rise where the Kings, they've done a good job with young and old players, but some of their best players are a little long in the tooth, and Drew Doughty and Anze Kopitar. So, I think of that as well. And Lane Hutson's an offensive dynamo. He's setting some rookie records for defensemen this year. He leads the rookie race in points as a defenseman. And I'm going to throw one at you quickly. What do you think? Should he be the favorite for the Calder race? Because Macklin Celebrini is still a favorite and Lane Hutson is second. Those odds have shrunk a bit, but I think Lane Hutson should definitely be the person to win the Calder if the season ended today. And I'm kind of shocked that Celebrini is still the favorite.
It's interesting because I think, he doesn't have many goals. Hutson,
he doesn't have many goals. He's a defenseman.
He's a defenseman, yeah, 100%. But you saw some of these other guys that are defensemen doing, but the amount of assists he's stacking up, it's incredible. I'm curious to see what happens over the next 5 to 10 game stretch. It's like, what does Lane Hutson have to do in order to get this? Because Celebrini, this is a thing that I'll mention, and I'm going to ask you how much this matters because we all look at these awards differently. And I'm going to use this comparison, okay? Dustin Wolf has been unbelievable. And when I watch games involving the Calgary Flames, especially when I'm betting against them, I'm like, man, this guy is carrying the team, okay? Without him, who are they? But if they don't win enough games, he doesn't get the recognition. Does it hurt Celebrini that he's not good or his team's not good? Or is it helping him? Because it seems like it's almost helping him. He's like,
it doesn't appear like it's hurting him, and it doesn't appear like it hurt Bedard last year. I just see the way the voters choose. It seems to be like they go with the most offensive guy bit, where really sometimes the defenseman who's playing 22 minutes a night and has his team actually in a playoff race where they haven't made the playoffs for years and is producing more points than anybody else, to me should be the slam dunk Calder winner. But I threw that in there. I digress a bit. Yeah. I have made a bet on Lane Hutson to win the Calder Award. That's why I was asking you. But
if a team is down 7-3, I just have to say, if a team is down 7-3, right? I told you that Celebrini had that third goal for the Sharks with 4 minutes to go in the game, but they lost 7-3. And then I told you that to tie the game against the Ottawa Senators in the biggest game of the year to try and make the wild card spot, Lane Hutson scored a goal. Which matters the most? I know it's a team game and there's 20-some players on the ice or on the team, but at the end of the day, one guy is playing a lot more of a crucial role. If you're an NBA player and you're dropping 35 points in a game, but your team loses by 40, who cares?
Yeah. I definitely think it should be Hudson's award, but the odds makers don't agree with me right now. So we'll see what happens down the stretch here. Sticking with the fantasy corner here, who has had a more impressive fantasy breakout season? Aleksei Protas of the Washington Capitals or Pavel Dorofeyev of the Vegas Golden Knights for you?
I look at these two teams in very similar fashions. You know, two teams that have depth, two teams that play the hard type of hockey, good goaltending, of course, but these are two players that have kind of come out of nowhere. And Dorofeyev, to me, has been a guy that's kind of been that more of a shocker. Obviously, both players have been that for their team, but one guy, Protas, is playing on the first line, one guy being second line right winger. I feel like for Dorofeyev, he's been kind of someone that's shocked me a little bit more. His confidence every single game, his most recent game, a goal and an assist. You know, the shot counts have been super high. The confidence he's playing with. The thing for me with the Washington Capitals is obviously depth has been their thing, and that's what's helped them have this fantastic year they've had. But I truly believe that they could go on a 4-1 stretch and their guy could not have a single point. Versus right now, I think the Vegas Golden Knights are actually relying on their guy a lot more.
Okay. That's an interesting take. I thought you would have taken Protas. He's having a dynamic year and very interesting stat. He leads the league in plus minus. I kind of want to double check that to make sure.
Interesting.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it the other day. I know Washington's good, plus 42 on the year, leading the league in plus minus. And I don't know if he's hit 30 goals yet, but I think he's at 29, if not at 30. But I got you. You made some good points there. Sticking in the fantasy corner again, who are the players you're looking to add this week?
You know what, George? There's a lot we could add around this time of year, and you try and figure out teams that whether they're in the playoffs or they're not in the playoff push right now, you're trying to figure out certain guys to kind of snipe off. Here's someone that's worth mentioning, and I got a lot of guys actually from the same team for this kind of segment here, but Jordan Eberle, he's someone that I want to look at. He's not overly owned in the fantasy world. 8 points in his last 5 games played overall. His shot counts have been high. He's playing in crucial moments. He's doing well on the power play. This guy just seems to be turning it on at the right moment. And this is kind of a sneaky time for fantasy, because you got guys like this in certain situations that we don't know how the rest of the season is going to go for them. But hey, they're really turning it on. Another guy, Chandler Stevenson, 7 points in his last 6 games played overall. Again, his ice time has been up, skyrocketing. His chemistry with his line mates has been good. And he's been a consistent player right now. Again, 7 points his last 6 games played overall. And then another one, and this is one I was really shocked, and I've tried to do better about looking at fantasy ownership. Taylor Hall. You know, we talked about the Hurricanes a couple times in the show today about losing Rantanen and losing Nassios. Who's the only guy that can really say they added this year? And that guy is Taylor Hall, really. I think he's someone that's worthy of a pickup in the fantasy section.
Okay, interesting. Yes, Taylor Hall, definitely a forgotten man. On the opposite ends, which players should fantasy owners be looking to drop this week?
So a lot of times we've talked about some of these young studs, and there was a guy, Capo Caco, from the same team that we just talked about a couple different times that we want to pick up. I mean, after the trade, this guy looked like a shell of himself. He was a whole different person. He gained some confidence. He became a different guy, but he hasn't gotten a point in 5 of his last 6 games. His shot count has been down. He just hasn't really been able to find his offense, I guess, the way that we kind of know him to be a little bit. So I can't really trust him. And then another guy that's from the Minnesota Wild I'm going to look at is Brock Faber. And I know that might sound a little bit crazy, but there's a lot more guys right now that are producing offense. This Minnesota Wild team, they need their defensemen to stay back and protect their own end right now. They're not really scoring a ton of goals consistently. There's a lot more kind of sleeper defensemen you could pick up. Unless it's a keeper league. But if this is just a year-by-year league, I'd actually look to drop him.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's quite a big name to be looking to drop. Okay. Thanks again, Andrew. This has been another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's Stix.com. For Andrew McInnis, I'm George Nassios. We'll see you next time.